video, we're going to assemble the SNO-MASTER 48 standard. You can also use this video if you have the SNO-MASTER 72, or if you have any of the accessories, the RAZOR, the wheel kit, or the rear tow bar. The first thing that we recommend that you do is lay out all of the parts and pieces and make sure that you have everything that's in the parts and packing list. The first thing we're going to set up is the chassis itself. You'll find the wings and runners inside of the chassis, as well as the chassis screws that hold the bow cover down on the back. So make sure that you get those out, as well as the chassis runner bolts and nuts. To install the wings and runners, you'll want to do this at the same time. So the runners will go directly against the body of the chassis, and the wings will go up against the runners on the outside. It's also useful to use a block of some kind underneath the chassis to lift it up, because the runners will stick down below the bottom of the chassis, which help keep the snow groomer in line behind your machine. First, you have the carriage bolt, which goes in the front. Next will be the other remaining bolts to go through the wing first and then into the chassis. Remember to hang on to your screws for the bow cover. We're going to go ahead and continue setting up the chassis as we move into the tow bars. First though, again, before we close this up, we're going to start with the chassis bar and your pan link adjusters and your chassis bar mount. Your chassis bar has two sides. One side has a welded mount. The other side has 4 holes for the chassis bar mount itself. We're going to go ahead and set the chassis bar onto the chassis through the weld side first. That will allow us to then attach the mount on the other side. Now, this mount needs to go inside of the chassis bar, between the chassis bar and the chassis itself. We're actually going to slide it onto the chassis first, and then we can line it up, and then using the screws and your lock washers, you can go ahead and attach it directly to the chassis bar mount. A recommendation for this step, as well as many of the other steps along the process, make sure that all of the screws are started before tightening any one of these screws down. So we're going to go ahead and just slowly crisscross, tightening these down just like you would a car tire or lug nuts. Just going to slowly alternate through until each one of these are snug. Now that you have the chassis bar mounted to the chassis bar mount onto the chassis itself, now we can take the smaller hitch pin and connect and secure the chassis bar into place on both sides. This should allow your chassis bar to freely float on the chassis and will allow us to move to the next step of adding the pan link adjuster on the front of the chassis bow. For your pan link adjuster, you're going to have several different holes or options for setting your chassis and the tow bars. To start, we recommend that you loosely attach the pan link adjuster on the bottom hole and the third hole down from the top against the chassis bar. We'll go ahead and attach that now. Then, once you've actually attached the groomer to your machine, you may need to come back and adjust it to make sure that your level indicator is at the right angle. The optimal position for your chassis is 1 to 2 degrees pitched up in the front, and you want your tow bars as level as possible when they're attached to your machine. Attaching the bottom of your pan link adjuster, you'll use the bolt through a washer, through the pan link, then through a spacer, and then into the chassis itself. Again, you want to make sure the pan link adjuster can freely flow, and you may need to adjust it later depending on your machine and the angle of the groomer. Now that we have the pan link adjusters in and installed, we can attach the chassis bar to the pan link adjuster using, again, either the third or fourth hole somewhere here in the middle while we set it up and get it ready to be attached Before we move on to the tow bars and the deflectors, you can now secure your bow covers using the screws that were included. Simply screw those onto the back or leave them open and accessible for weight if you decide to add weight. First, we'll want to attach the deflectors to the deflector bar. The deflector bar has 4 holes on one side for attaching to the tow bars, and on the other side has 12 or 18 holes, depending on if you have the 48 or 72-inch SNO-MASTER. To attach the deflectors, you'll place the deflector against the deflector bar, and then using the truss head screws, go through the plastic into the deflector bar. Now that we have the deflectors mounted to the deflector bar, we can just set the deflector bars down and out of the way while we move on to the actual tow bars. As we move on to the tow bars, again, remember to loosely fit all of the bolts first before tightening everything down. Additionally, if you have the razor, make sure that you start that process before you tighten all of the front tow bar mount bolts. The first step is to attach the tow bar mounts to the chassis bar. Remember to attach your deflector lowering mounts to the bottom of the chassis bar through the same bolt that you're using for the tow bar mounts. Once you have the mounts loosely attached, then we can slide the tow bar through these same mounts to slowly start to assemble the tow bars themselves. And then repeat for the other side. Now, before we tighten anything to the chassis bar or to the tow bars themselves, we need to attach the tow mount to the front of the tow bars. Remember to leave these a little loose if you have a razor as well. Make sure to watch that video for those installation instructions. Now that we have all of the bolts for the tow bar in, we can begin rotating and slowly tightening them all up as we go. And then before we do the last set of tightening around the tow bars, make sure to attach your deflector bar to the deflector drop mounts while they're still a little loose. Once you've made sure that all of the bolts around the groomer and the nuts are tight, now we can go ahead and install either the standard, or if you have one of the 3 or 5-inch drops, or any of the other connectors to the front. Make sure to install your shear pin. Any extra shear pins you have can go on the back of the tow bar mount. And then if you need to go over a 2-inch ball, or if you have a J-hook, you can pull your detent pin and slide that right in the front. That's it for the setup of the SNO-MASTER 48 or 72 standard. If you have the razor, wheel kit, or rear tow bar for pulling a tracker and detracker, make sure to watch those videos for those guides as well.